Welcome, everybody. I'm Dan Cox, the Director of Grad Studies in Neuroscience. And I'm delighted to host this panel today of speakers or students who are current fellows for NIH pre-doctoral and/or postdoctoral fellowships. And so I'm just going to introduce each one and let them say a few words about themselves. We're going to run this session largely as Q&A, as well as letting our panelists tell you all about their own experience. Let me start first with Nico Rigney.
Hi, everyone. My name's Nico. So I'm a fourth-year PhD student, and I work in the neuroscience department with Dr. Ars Petroulis and Geert de Vries. And my work mainly focuses on studying social behavior and what are the neurosubstrates that underlie these social behaviors. And I look at the neuropeptide vasopressin and how vasopressin also plays a role in social behavior.
And Nico, just state for us which fellowship you currently hold.
Yes, and so I have the F31 NRSA.
Great. And let me move to Nate Himmel.
So hi, I'm Nate. I'm also a neuroscience PhD candidate. I work in Dan Cox's lab, and I also have an F31 fellowship. So my work broadly concerns how multimodal sensory neurons can differentiate between different stimulus modalities, thereby driving stimulus-relevant behaviors. And that's actually the core of my research proposal too in my F31. Yeah, that's all I'll say for intro.
Okay. And our last panelist is Laura Cortez.
Hi, everyone. I am a fifth-year PhD candidate. I'm also in the Neuroscience Institute. I work with Dr. Nancy Forger. I have the F99K00, and my dissertation proposal, as well as my application, wants to investigate the epigenetic underpinnings of sexual differentiation of cell type in the brain.
Great. So what I thought we would do to kick off our discussion, and also I'm taking notes about who's attending the session. I have a set of slides. So just so you know, I'm on a standing study section that reviews for F31, F32 proposals, and have some experience with the K99 or F99 KOO. So I'm Laura's co-sponsor, and I'm also a co-sponsor for another F99 KOO at Emory. So I will be happy to send that slide deck on fellowship preparation and sort of some basic questions around how to prepare competitive fellowships to you via email after this session. So what I wanted to start out with was just asking the panelists about, what tips do you recommend for graduate students in preparing these competitive fellowship proposals? And maybe we'll start with Laura, because Laura's is a very distinctive mechanism, and I know she has a slide that she'd like to share. So I'm going to pull her slide up here. Can everyone see this?
Thanks, Dan. Yeah, I can see it.
All right, great.
Yeah, so I have the F99K00. It's different from the F31 because it's funding the last 2 years of your PhD and up to 4 years of your postdoc. So you typically apply some people apply in the third year. I applied in my fourth year. And I have a lot of tips. I thought it would be easier to just go through this slide because it is a big application. It could be a little intimidating. So the purpose, at least for DSPAN, this is from NINDS. They want to increase diversity in the workforce, but there's also an F99K00 from the NIA, the National Institute on Aging, and also from the Cancer Institute, and those are different. But anyway, my tips are that you have to research this grant, either the F31 or the DSPAN F99K00. Because there's a lot that goes into it and you want to be well prepared. And so I recommend that you figure out like the differences between like the F99K00 from the NCI NIA. They have different deadlines, different requirements. So make sure you're educated on that. And then go listen to the NINDF NIH podcast, Building Up the Nerve. So these are actually the program officer from the NINDF gives you tips, and they walk through the grants process and how to put together your strongest application. And I also linked this website, Putting Together Your Strongest. So I don't know if Dan, if you could share this with people. I know I can email it to you, Erica, but anyone else that would
can
want
add it to the slide deck.
Yeah. So yeah, determine where you apply, connect with previous awardees. So I decided to message people on Twitter that I knew already had the grant, and they were super helpful. They sent me their application materials. They gave me tips on how to apply, how much time to spend on each part, and they shared their application with me, which was super helpful. You want to give yourself enough time to write. So initially, I only gave myself 3 months, and then I ended up realizing that it takes a lot of time, especially if you're running experiments and doing other stuff. So I ended up giving myself 5 months. So plan for 5 to 6 months of writing, at least for this application. I share a timeline there that you can check out, like how I ended up splitting my time, the different parts of the application and what to do when. And you want to give yourself enough time, at least in my experience. I knew that I wanted time to work on it heavily and then like leave it alone for a couple months, because if you look at it with fresh eyes, you could look at it from like the eyes of a reviewer better. You want to make sure that you share your application with your sponsor and co-sponsor, in my case, which was Dan. So I ended up sharing my materials when I had worked on it for months already. So then when they give you feedback, it's a little bit harder. It's a little bit more like fixed. So give it to them early so you can take their feedback and like integrate it with what you're writing. And they also have, obviously, they successfully apply for grants, so they're going to know, if it's clear enough what makes a good application versus not. And then, yeah, I put down there like what I think was the most important for, my application. It was the background and training goals, because this is where you set yourself apart and you convince the reviewers why they should fund you. Especially with training grants, like they really are wanting to fund the person in addition to the research proposal. And then after that, I focused on the research. And then thirdly, I gave a lot of attention to my specific aims, because that's one page where you have to like sell yourself and your project. So that's what I would spend the most amount of time on. And yeah, I can go back to the timeline if you guys have questions about that, but I want to give time for Nate and Nico to also give insight.
Any immediate questions on this slide? We're going to definitely have time for Q&A for sure. And I will share this slide as part of the deck. All right, let me stop sharing. All right, let me turn to Nate.
Yeah, so I mean, kind of what Laura alluded to, we could go on and on about the specific details of, what goes into a good application and whatnot. And Dr. Cox is a really good resource for that. He's going to have more to say about that than I will. But one thing I really wanted to mention when I was thinking about this question of what was really challenging about this is I don't think we should undersell the administrative component of this, especially for these pre-doctoral fellowships where this is the first time, if you're applying for this, you're going to actually be a PI in the mind of the NIH. So you're going to be responsible for a substantial amount of administrative work just to get this application in. So in addition to leaving time for writing, you have to leave time at the end to actually get it submitted, because it's going to take more time than you think it is. And if you rush it at the end, you'll still probably get it in, but it's going to be very frustrating and very difficult. So yeah, that was the first thing that came to mind. And then if we're going to continue the discussion to talk about specific aspects, I can talk about that later.
All right, let's let Nico chime in on this.
Yeah, like Nate said, there are a lot of specific aspects that we can go through. I do agree with the give yourself time for turning in the administrative stuff. That that did kind of throw me for a loop for the first time turning in an application like this. Yeah, so definitely give yourself some time for that. I guess overall, first and foremost, you want to make sure that your lab has the funding to support you if you're applying for the F31. I waited until our lab got an R01 to start this process because I knew that you won't get the NRSA grant if your lab doesn't have support for you. So that was a main deciding factor for me for when I started this. And like Laura was saying, you want to review all the rules on the NIH website so that you understand the format. And one of the biggest things for me was asking others for help. So I asked Nate for help. I asked to look at his NRSA, and that was extremely helpful just to see the format of how something like that is put together. I asked other people online what they did and advice that they had for applying for this kind of grant. And I also asked a lot of faculty members what they thought. And so don't do this by yourself. Try to get as much help and advice as possible. I think that was the most helpful for me. Yeah.
Yeah, these end up being around 60 to 70 page documents, or in Laura's case, it might have actually been longer than that because she's talked, her fellowship is spanning across the end of the PhD and into the postdoctoral training. So a document of that magnitude is on the same order as what you see when we apply for an R01. It has lots of bells and whistles, lots of important reporting requirements, and each one of those reporting elements are individually evaluated. So it's very different than writing a PI grant for just research, because it's not a research grant, it's a training grant. And so your research plan is important, of course, and lots of people will weight that very heavily. But it's not the only aspect that's under careful scrutiny. And just before we move to the next question, Nico, can you say something, because you went through an A1 submission, and that's important too, because it is very common that you will get evaluated, but you may need to resubmit. And so how do you deal with comments you get back on your initial review?
So the first thing is don't get upset. And you want to try to address the negative comments the best you can. And I went to my advisors with those comments, and we worked through them, and I generated some more data to best answer the questions that they had, and I reapplied. And the second time I applied, I got it. So don't get discouraged the first time you submit it and you don't get the score you're wanting to get.
Yeah, it's all about perseverance.
Mm-hmm.
So I want to ask the panelists one more question as a general question. Then I'm just going to open it up for questions from participants on the call. And so this is something that usually students are not as comfortable answering, but it's an important point, which is you have to toot your own horn. So Laura, in your view, what do you feel made you, what elements really made your application competitive?
So I think it's that I had a lot of undergraduate research experience. So I had co-authorship, some manuscripts that had already been published. I didn't have a first author publication from, any of my dissertation work, but I had a co-first author, and I had a review that I wrote. So I think everything counts. And then I put in every poster that I was, ever mentioned on. So that helped a lot. And then I'm trying to think. Well, now you don't need to put grades in, but I put grades because, I worked very hard for them. So I think they were a bonus to show that, I go all in when it comes to my academics and my research work.
Great. Nate?
So I'll start by saying what individually the strengths were of my application, but then hopefully reassure you that that's not necessary. So I think the primary strength of my application and why I got it is because I had, I think, 10 publications when we applied. But I don't think that that is a necessary component of this. And obviously I don't have any evidence of this, but this is what my gut is telling me. I think the reason it was useful in my case is because it made up for substantial weaknesses in my application, like a mediocre GPA from undergraduate, a distinct lack of undergraduate research experience, things like that. But I think showing a degree of research productivity is important. And I think more important than that is showing a degree of independence of thought. So being sure that you're coming up with at least a portion of the research component by yourself, that it's maybe not considerably, but moderately independent of the work that your PI is primarily doing, right? You don't have to wholly, completely innovate, I doubt, but being able to show that you have independence of thought is also really helpful. In fact, one of the main bits on my summary statement where they explained why they awarded the grant is that despite this whole bunch of weaknesses, this individual shows the capacity for a continued career in academic research. So they're really looking to fund people that they think can train into sort of the academic path, right? Train into an NIH-funded research lab. So think about the things that make a good PI and try to show that you're trying to do those things. And if you have some mediocre background or some potentially bad, like I had horrible grades, you can overcome that. I don't think those are the things they're necessarily looking for.
And I would just, add on to that. Don't ignore it, right? If you were required to report, which they don't any longer require you to report your grades.
That's nice.
if you have what you perceive as a weakness, even yourself, speak to it, right? Speak to it. Don't just ignore it because, the reviewers are going to see this, but when they hear you contextualize, this is not indicative of my, of the broader positives of my application. We appreciate hearing the students' perspective on that. All right, Nico?
Hi, I think similar to Nate, the strengths with mine were my publications. I didn't have the best background with undergrad like Laura because I came from the same, I've been at GSU my whole training, and is considered a negative, and they pointed that out as a negative actually in the application. But since I had so many publications, I didn't have as many as Nate, but since I had publications, I think that made up for that issue potentially. That I showed that I was productive in the lab. I think also what a difficult thing to do is to balance out the use of new techniques that you're going to be trained on, but also show that you have experience. So I think that was something that they liked, is that I was doing this new technique. I was adding optogenetics components to my grant that I've never done before. But I also had other components in there that I'm proficient in, like doing stereotaxic viral injections and behavioral analysis. And so, but you also need to show that someone will train you on this, so you have to provide evidence of that. So a postdoc in the lab who has published data using this technique, perhaps. And I didn't have that, so I reached out to Maurice Prant, who had published using optogenetics at GSU. So she wrote me a letter that said that she would assist me in whatever way. And to strengthen it even further, I added that I would attend an optogenetics workshop at Stanford University, which is something they offer in the summer. And the reviewers all had very positive comments on how I put that in there. So I think that really strengthened it to show that you're going to have sufficient training in a new technique that you haven't learned yet.
I think that's a really important point of these applications because they are training grants, is that, depending upon when you decide that you were going to apply, right? Um, Nate's got critiqued of why'd you wait so long? So there is sort of a sweet spot for when to apply, and really the sweet spot is kind of in the 3rd to 4th year of training. The 3rd year can be risky because you're still building your CV, you're still building a publication record. But if you wait late, like into your 5th year, you could get critiqued of, well, haven't you really trained in, a really had a lot of training? Like, what are you going to learn that's new in the PI's lab or through a collaboration? And so let me do this and just open it up to the people on the call to ask questions they may have. I have others I can stimulate, but just feel free to unmute yourself and ask a question if you have one.
I have a question for the panel. Speaking to working with postdocs, I mean, do you think it will strengthen an application if you are collaborating outside of your lab on this grant application?
I'll just say that on my summary statement, this wasn't specific to me, but it was specific to Dan, my sponsor, was that he had collaborations was a good thing. They marked that in the strengths category, was collaboration. So I think the answer is absolutely, right?
Yeah, so I think for me, getting a co-sponsor was very helpful. So my PI had experience in studying behavioral neuroscience, but I added Geert de Vries as a co-sponsor because he had a strong history in studying sex differences and the anatomy of vasopressin, the peptide I was looking at. So I recommend finding a co-sponsor, which will make your training look stronger. And if you have that, then you also have the resources in their lab as well to help you.
Yeah, they really like sponsor, co-sponsor setups. In Nate's case, he didn't have a co-sponsor, but I had a very significant track record of training PhD students. If you're working with a junior faculty member, they won't have as much of a record. And so there it's kind of important to have a co-sponsor. The other reason that having a co-sponsor is valuable is the panel just sees it as the breadth of your training will be deeper and will be more synergistic across the different areas of expertise. And as Kelly points out, where it's possible for you to get even letters of recommendation from multiple institutions, that's valuable because it helps to speak to your broader professional network. And that's important too. We know that networking is a critical element of success in this career. And so that people are aware of your work beyond the university is valuable.
With the letters, I'll just add that I think in my summary statement, I had 4 letters from 4 different institutions, and they commented on that too specifically as a strength. So if you can get letters from outside your institution, absolutely.
Yeah, I do want to add that. So my PI, Nancy Forger, she's an established professor, but she didn't have an R01. And a lot of the experiments that I'm interested in our lab doesn't have the expertise in. So that's where Dan came in, and a lot of people, or my reviewers, commented very favorably on my team of Dan and Nancy. So I think that really like boosted my application, that I had two very strong mentors, on my team that will be guiding me throughout my PhD. And then I am, for a part of my experiments, I'm collaborating with someone at Emory. And so this professor wrote me a letter of support. So he wasn't a letter writer because I didn't know him very personally, but I have worked with him, and he was very helpful in, sending a letter saying that he will collaborate with me and that he's going to do this for my application. So I think that helped as well.
Yeah, the only thing I would provide is caution about selecting a co-sponsor. They have to be integrated. It has to make sense. It's not just, well, my PI is not NIH funded, but my co-sponsor is, so that will make me look better. It won't necessarily make it look better if there's not a clear discussion of what do each of these mentors or sponsors bring to the table, and how does that create an environment that's larger than the sum of its parts. We see a lot on panel of people sort of shoehorning in a funded investigator because they have a lot of money. Okay, that's great, but if we don't really understand what they're going to commit to supporting the project, we see through that immediately, and it absolutely gets dinged.
I'm also going off of what you just said. I think it is good to talk to others like Dan who have experience reviewing these kinds of applications. I went around and I found faculty that I knew were sat in on these review panels and were participated in them, and that was very helpful to have those discussions to see, what the reviewers are looking for.
I think that's, Dan, if you don't mind me following up on that, I think that's a really, really important point. And I think it's a very unfortunate truth in academia that you're probably not going to succeed without insider information. So if you've never applied for a grant like this and your PI has never had a fellowship training grant like this and you try to go about it alone, I think your chances of success are greatly diminished, if only because the panel's often looking for very specific language on things. Like if just using the phrase independent development plan, IDP, using that and using the acronym IDP, that's something they picked up in my application and marked as a strength. And I don't think it would have mattered if I described an IDP without using that phrase. It's sort of about making sure that phrase is in there so that they catch it. So I think the most helpful thing you can do is talk to people, like this has been a thing everybody's talked about, but talk to people who have gotten this, talk to PIs who have trained students on these grants, and try to find out the very specific things that need to be included in there and make sure they're integrated well into it. And I think that's probably the main key to success more than any other specific detail.
That's a great point.
I have a question. I think that this maybe is mostly a question for Dan, but it's about aims. How much do the aims need to be? Do they all need to be hypothesis driven? Is it automatically a bad mark if you have a phishing aim? And also, how do they need to be from the aims that are in grants that your PI already has?
So this is a great question, Thea. Ideally, they should be somewhat independent of your PIs, but the reality is for F31 applicants, you're probably not developing an entirely independent set of questions because your lab is funded to do a certain set of studies and you fit under those studies. So it's, like in Nate's case, it was, his project straddles across two of the aims, and it's subparts of two of the aims of the particular R01 that supports that project. And the panel knows this. the panel knows we're not funding fellows by giving you research money, right? The research money is through the faculty members grant. We're funding fellows through stipend support, tuition waiver, and some professional development funding for travel or health insurance, or maybe some incidental experimental costs. So it doesn't need to be completely independent of the PI. And the reality is that the review panel doesn't know what the PI's R01 aims are. Like, they could do homework and drill down and find this out through mechanisms like the NIH reporter, but they don't typically drill down that deep. Remind me, Thea, what the first part of your question was.
My other question was, is it necessary that all aims be hypotheses?
So, is it necessary? There's no explicit rule. Is it advisable that they're all hypothesis driven? Yes. And that doesn't mean that there cannot be a discovery driven component to what you're proposing to do. For example, I believe in Laura's proposal, there's obviously what she's proposing to do in the postdoctoral phase. She hasn't done any of it yet, right? It's completely theoretical, and there are aspects of it that would be, epigenomic kind of global investigations. I think if you design your aim in such a way where the exploratory nature of the aim is balanced by something in the literature, something that, yes, we're going to do a transcriptomic or some kind of screen-based analysis, but the literature also suggests that in other systems, molecule X interacts with A, B, C, D. And so I can have kind of a mixed aim of this is risky and this is safe. So even if the risky fails, I'm still going to get something out of it. I think the most important part in designing the aims is that the aims are not linearly dependent upon one another. In other words, if aim 1 has to succeed in order to do aim 2, right? That's a house of cards, and just immediately gets triaged. And people are looking for, yes, the aims build upon one another, maybe they interface with each other, but even if aim 1 fails, it doesn't mean the project is a total, loss.
I've gotten a lot of mileage out of the phrase interrelated but not interdependent aims specifically. That catches people's attention nicely.
Hi, I have a question about the actual review process, so that's probably a question more for Dan.
Yeah. Hey, Greg.
Hi, is it like a research group? So I guess what I'm coming from is sort of domain specificity, right? So I'm in the chemistry department, so the types of projects coming out are not going to be the same as something out of neuroscience, for example. Are they going to sort of domain specific study sections where they will look at different types of applications in a domain specific way, or is there a sort of F31 study section where they look at all F31s no matter where they come from?
So it's a great question, and the answer is they do end up on domain-specific study sections. So, for example, perhaps your portfolio, and this is Dr. Poon from chemistry, maybe your natural institute might be NIGMS because they fund a lot of the chemistry portfolio for the NIH. So NIGMS is going to have their own specific FOF panel study sections. And just as an example, the 3 panelists that we have today, Nate's is funded through NINDS, Laura's is funded through NINDS, but Nico's is funded through National Institute of Mental Health. Correct, Nico? Yeah, so even at the institute level, the panel that Nate's goes to is not the same panel that Laura's would have gone to. They're very specialized. And that gets handled by the program officer. They look at um, they look at the specific aims page and figure out which panel it may be best on. So I can tell you that in neuroscience, uh, Aris, Nico's boss, and I and Anne Murphy, we all serve on these F panels, but we don't serve on the same one. Like I'm on the cellular and molecular, Anne is on the systems, and Aris is probably more in the behavioral realm. So they are very specific.
So so I'm kind of, looking at this because my own experience is um, with proposal review in the research segment. Is there sort of therefore a degree of specificity where, you go to different study sections and they are looking for non-identical things, right? So on paper, it's all the same, but if you kind of drill down and you ask the program officers, they're not all looking for the identical things. So
Yeah,
is that the case too, with app proposal?
I wouldn't say it's the case with the F proposals. So very different than the R proposals. Um, uh, the panels are more set up around areas of expertise, like that this research is in a cellular and molecular neuroscience domain. And so we're going to populate the panel with experts in that area. But we all go through training from the NIH on specifically, this is not an R grant. Do not evaluate it like an R grant. Even the template that we use to write our evaluation is very prescribed. You have to comment on the training potential. You have to comment on the candidate, the applicant. So it's different. I should say it's more uniform in its review than for PIs. I know, like, there are panels that I avoid like the plague. Please, please, please don't send my grant to this panel. Like, we do work in an area of nociception, which is like detection of noxious stimuli. If my grants ended up going to a clinical pain study section, I get crucified because I work with the fruit fly, and those panels are almost exclusively populated by clinicians, and they hate the fruit fly. So you can actually provide a cover letter to go with the proposal the same way that we do for our grants and suggest to the program officer which panel you think it is best aligned to. They're going to make their own decision, but that is something that you can do in applying for these F grants.
Great, thank you.
You're welcome.
They actually made me do that for my second reapplication, where I had to make a cover letter and choose the panel. So I don't know if they changed the rules where you have to do that now.
It's in your interest to tell them where you think it belongs, and granted, you may not know, right? So the information is available on what the different panels focus on, but you have to drill down through the Center for Scientific Review to really find this. So my advice is, contact me if your PI doesn't know, but certainly your mentor is your starting place.
So Nico, just out of curiosity, do you know whether it went back to the same study section or went somewhere different for the A1?
It went to the same study section, yes. Yeah.
And usually that's what you want for an A1, because those are the people who wrote the critique, and they're going to want to see how did you respond to the critique. You may not always get the same people who reviewed it the first time to review it the second time. Like I routinely review A1 applications that I was not an initial reviewer. But what's important is on study section, when that comes up, you are not allowed to say, I reviewed this the first time. That's a no, 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 no. You have to treat it as, you know, because you don't want to influence the panel's evaluation of the proposal itself. It should be judged on its merits as well as judged on the degree to which that you have answered the prior critiques.
And they actually will give you a list of all of the people on the panel. And so you can kind of look through and see what kind of people are reviewing that might be reviewing your grant.
Yeah, like they usually give me all the fly grants, which is a plus because I can review those at a very deep level. It's also a minus because they're going to release the name of who was on the panel. And if there's only 2 fly reviewers, every one of my colleagues is going to know, Dan dinged my student or dinged my proposal.
And our app grants only allow an A1 just like the R's are?
Yes, that's correct. So you can do an A1 or, you know, depending upon the feedback you get, like let's say that you applied and on first submission, the grant was not discussed. So what does it mean if a grant was not discussed? It means that it was in the lower 50%. And so that may be telling you something about there's some fatal flaw and you're still going to get written feedback even if it wasn't discussed. But to go from below the 50th percentile to, you know, a fundable percentile, which is kind of probably more in the, you know, sub 10 to 15, 17 percentile, could be a big challenge, and you might be better off to just resubmit it as a fresh proposal. But if you submit and it gets discussed and it gets scored, say a 35 or a 30 or even a 40, that's still something that, depending upon what the critiques are, you may want to do the A1. So, you know, the benefit of starting early, for example, like submitting at the end of the 3rd year or the beginning of the 4th year, is that you'll likely need to go through an A1. Most people need to go through an A1 revision. But it gives you the time to do it and still, you know, not be, okay, well now I'm, you know, if you wait until the 5th or the 6th year and you're asking for 1 to 2 years and you have to do an A1, it starts to become a moot point because the panel will say, well, they're about to finish. I don't know that this is in their interest.
Great, thank you very much.
You're welcome. So I'll throw out a question. I guess, what did you find the most difficult part to prepare? What was the most like opaque part of this application where if you're starting from, I haven't seen one of these, that you would have been at a loss on how do I even prepare a response to this request?
Yeah, so Nate talked a little bit about this earlier, but for these applications, you have sections where you have to talk about every machine or anything that's available to you at your institution, and it's just like boilerplate. Like you have to, like the core, what's everything in the core. And I didn't realize this until like a month before it was due, that I had to do all these little things. Like you have to have a genomic data sharing plan, just a bunch of little, you know, parts of the application that I wasn't really focusing on because I was really, going after my backgrounds and training plan. So make sure that for me was difficult just because I didn't plan for it. Luckily, Nate gave me his application, and it helped out a lot to see like what was expected. Because when I just read the description, I'm like, I have no idea what they're talking about. So it really helps to have other applications, and it helps even more if they're from your same institution because you see like what is available to you that you also have to talk about.
And it's a great point, Laura, and it's something that the dean's office is working on, soliciting fellows' willingness to share their applications on a secure, server that cannot be accessed by anyone off campus, cannot be accessed by non-GSU, cannot be downloaded, but can be viewed. Because there is a lot of boilerplate that goes into preparing these applications that it's not useful to trainees to have to reinvent wheels that already exist. If it's something that you're willing to share, I think it's an incredibly valuable resource for those that are interested in applying, because even for faculty who may never have had an NRSA fellow in their lab, what does a faculty training plan, like, what does that look like? What does the sponsor's training plan look like? I know I spent months writing my training plan, and now I tweak it for different applications, but I know this works. Having been on panel for years and years and years, that they'll look at this and say, this is extremely detailed and rigorous and hits every single thing we're looking for. But if you don't have that insider point of view, it could be very challenging for even the faculty member to draft a compelling sponsor training plan.
So I think for me, the two major challenges were time management. You need to give yourself a lot of time to work on this. You can't just do it in a month. So that's my main advice for that. And then just putting together the specific aims was challenging for me. I had several ideas for the F31. So I went around and I tested those ideas with different people to see how they would react, and if the other people thought it was a good idea as well. The problem I had specifically was overambition, and I had to be told over and over and over that I needed to cut one of my aims because I was being overly ambitious. And that actually turned out well for me because the reviewers were questioning if the proposal, if my proposal was too much when I had that cut aim in there. So it doesn't mean that you can't do the work that that you want to do later. All of the work that you're doing doesn't have to be in your proposal, I guess what I'm trying to say. And it has to seem feasible to the reviewers. So I think that was the main challenge for me, is to balance out that feasibility in my aims.
That's a really important point. Thank you for raising that, Nico, because this is something, again, that reviewers look to almost immediately as a way to triage applications. Is if you're proposing 5 years of work, but you're asking for 3 years of funding, it's a death knell. So it's, you don't want to be under ambitious, right? There needs to be depth to what you propose to do, but it has to be offset by this is also rooted in reality. And so developing like a timeline that maybe you tack on to the end of the research plan of, I'm asking for 3 years of funding. This is how I see aim 1, aim 2, or maybe aim 3 being completed in that timeline. And that within that timeline, there should be time for your professional development activities, for your, attending meetings, writing papers, revising papers, perhaps even time for applying for a postdoctoral position. Because all of that we know is part of what one needs to do in advancing their career if they're going to go the postdoc route. But we all know it takes time. So it's a good point.
Yeah, and for so there is a section, I think it's called activities planned or something like that. And that's where you do your timeline. And I think a lot of people just would do the years, what they were going to do each year. And my PI recommended that I broke it out by semester and months. And I was not only breaking out my experiments, but also mentoring, scientific career development, going to conferences, what kind of leadership roles I was doing. And then also I added coursework and workshops that were offered at GSU. So I went online and I found out what kind of workshops were offered at GSU, and I put those in there. And I said I would attend those. And I got a really good response from the reviewers having that timeline broken out like that.
Yeah, likewise, the reviewer specifically commented on things like workshops that I had listed. So I think that's good general advice.
Yeah, they're looking for you to be well-rounded. And it's not uncommon at all that when fellows are talking about, or applicants are talking about, how will I distribute my time? We expect to see you say you're going to commit somewhere between 70 to 80% of your time on your research. But the other 20 to 25% is probably your professional development, maybe advanced workshops and training, mentoring, even outreach activities. These are all part of the trade that you want to be a well-rounded. For example, you may have had teaching experience, right, already, and you're not scheduled to do any more teaching. But maybe you want to, if that's a career path that you're interested in, like academia, it may be of value to say, well, I'll do these pedagogy workshops or curricular innovation workshops because, again, that's just going to help show how is this time of support going to best prepare you for the next stage of career.
Yeah, I will add that. So I do a lot of outreach and had a lot of positions, like leadership positions, that I sometimes worry that it was actually hurting my research. But I was surprised that for my reviews, they commented on it and it was seen as a positive. So keep that in mind, especially for DSEN. They want to find people that have leadership potential. So it's good to take those roles and have a careful balance.
Well, we're almost at the end of our hour. Are there any other questions that folks would like to ask? So, as I said, I've noted down everybody who has chimed in or logged in as a participant. I'm happy to send you the slide deck that I've prepared for, and the one that I would send is it's an insider's perspective from the fellowship review panel that really is focusing on the F31 and F32, which is the postdoctoral mechanism. I'll put on Laura's slide that nicely summarizes about the DSPAN F99 KOO award. And I certainly welcome you to reach out if you have questions that that I could be of support. We run these kind of workshops at least once a semester. This one is part of Research Reboot Week, but usually in the fall and probably sometime this spring, I'll run one with Dean Armistead from the graduate school. So there are people here to support you. It's not, you got to play to win, right? So the reality is nobody likes getting sharp criticism, but it helps you make you better, and it is a really valuable learning experience to put together one of these proposals, because it's for academics. It's it's our bread and butter in STEM fields. All right. I really want to thank Laura, Nico, and Nate for giving their time. They're great resources because they've been in the trenches and they know what it is to put these together. And student to student feedback, sometimes maybe it's intimidating to ask faculty, but I know that all of them have shared information with each other, and that just it's easier, it's more comfortable, but faculty are here to support you too.
Yeah, I want to thank everyone for their advice and feedback and sharing the experience.
Thanks, Greg.
Thank you so much for putting this together and for giving us your wisdom.
Thanks, everyone.
Thanks.
All right.
Thanks,
Thank you.
Thanks, everyone.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.